Power, riches, fame, glory, the promises of a career in urban planning. I don't really know why I do this job. It's thankless, it's difficult, it's psychologically and emotionally destructive, and yet here I am. I've been a professional urban planner for almost 10 years. I have a complicated relationship with the profession, but with the concept of planning, I'm fully committed. Most of the time, this feels like the only thing that I'm good at, which makes my professional crisis that much harder. I don't know what the future of the profession will be, but I do believe that society will always need planners. I get excited to hear of leftists entering the field, and I want them to be successful. Still, I think I owe the truth to anyone that asks, and I think that the more you want to make real change, the more you try to help people's lives be better, the harder it is to remain in the profession. There are a lot of things I wish I had known from the start, things that seem so obvious now. Planning schools won't prepare you to be a planner that supports community over capital. This is something you'll have to figure out both through exposure and by continuing your own education. I want to give early career planners some advice on how to adopt a radical planning framework. To help me get the point across, I have two inspirational guests, both planners in the radical tradition. They'll be sharing their experiences in the profession and offering some advice to move to a transformative or radical approach. I'll let them introduce themselves.
My name is Sabrina, and I'm a community-based planner, and I have a focus on housing policy.
My name is Tom Angotti. I'm a professor emeritus at Hunter College and the Graduate Center, City University of New York.
This video will walk you through the conversations I had with Tom and Sabrina. They'll both discuss their own experiences as planners, their challenges, and their visions of how we should operate as professionals. I do want to stress that this video is for leftists. If you're sympathetic to neoliberal capitalism, you should just close the video. You're not going to enjoy this, and you shouldn't waste your time. This is for people who know we can't maintain our current systems if we want to escape the crises we face today. Let's get started. Planning before you're a planner is exciting. Planning a school is a place of ideas, of exploration, and of total control. That's not really realistic. You can't plan in a vacuum. Planning is the opposite of a vacuum. It's connected to everything, and your actions can ruin people's lives. Or you could make people's lives better, so shoot for that second one in everything you do. Planners are important, even if they inherently serve neoliberal capitalism. A good planner can help people look at things differently, help them come up with new ideas and solutions to their own problems. We unlock creativity in people. A good planner can see how our world connects to itself and help communities see it too. But the way that the planner thinks about society and about planning will greatly enhance or diminish their ability to do this. Sabrina explains why planning and theoretical frameworks are important.
I think planning is important because, well, first, I'm a systems and operations-oriented person. So I see planning as the route toward political and economic revolution. Granted that the pedagogy of the planner is being taught under pedagogy of the oppressed. And so I think that planning is important because having these planning skills to critically assess the social, political, economic history and existing conditions of a place, a system, program is incredibly important to developing a radical planning orientation and framework.
Unfortunately, in your early career, you're probably going to be navigating around a less radical theory of planning called communicative theory. Communicative planning, which I'll make a whole video on soon, is basically the idea that if you bring everyone to the table, the oppressor and the oppressed, then they'll all have equal power. It doesn't work that way. You can't resolve system-wide inequities through a couple of meetings. You'll also be expected to see the public as antagonistic. You'll be asked to withhold information or manipulate it to make it public-facing. Basically, a lot of your professors and eventually your employer will try to convince you that the public is a burden and that they need to compromise on the development machine's terms. Tom explains why the planning profession and communities are at odds.
Planning is too often dealt with abstractly, considering communities as an instrument for planning. That is, they're simply intermediaries. So too much planning education today is geared towards teaching students how to hold a community meeting, how to take notes, how to give people feedback, and how to essentially manipulate the communities. I got my training and disdain for official community planning back in the 60s and 70s with the civil rights movement, by working with communities that were living in dire circumstances decrepit housing that they had very little control over because they were did not own the buildings. They were subject to landlord abuse. They also very clearly sent a message that when you're an outsider and you're a white outsider, you're part of the problem. So it sent me the message that I had to understand the inside much better.
As you get more comfortable in your job, when you feel more secure, you might have the impulse to inject leftism into the framework your employer expects of you. And to a degree, this can reduce some harm. At the very least, you can steer the conversation to something more productive, especially if you can back that up with data or research. But ultimately, neoliberalism isn't just opposed to leftism, it's disinterested in it. Your political ideology isn't just a risk to your job security, it's also something that will be readily dismissed by your employer, clients, and elected officials. Here's Sabrina.
Some of the main challenges first in the profession is that planning is majority and like overwhelmingly cis hetero white, and so that philosophy kind of plays out in the way policies are carried on. um, and there's also severe lack of understanding of racial equity, and just having a critical race lens and analysis. And especially in my experience in housing, there's this um, predisposition and practice to uh, being race neutral. And this leads to alienating policy, and as well as suppressing the voices and needs of Black and Brown people, because you're removing race, and you're removing a race analysis. So that's really problematic. And also some of the challenges for me as being a Black communist, I identify as a communist, and being a Black communist planner, is that by being Black and communist, I'm inherently in opposition to mainstream neoliberal planning, and neoliberal pedagogy teaching, because my methods and training is rooted in analyzing social, economic, political, historical factors when assessing existing conditions, and turning to and valuing community experts, and seeing community as experts, and not just as like token, like checkbox for engagement. As I'm learning in my planning career, this type of methodology and analysis is not done or valued in neoliberal planning, and the social historical part especially is missing. And what I've learned is that neoliberal planning is very much about technocracy, being race neutral, and taking like top line aggregate data as like objective facts, kind of missing the qualitative, missing the people, the stories, especially like in housing, missing the stories about displacement and what it means to be displaced, and just kind of focusing on the quantitative data. And so there's a lack of understanding of race and how history impacts present day and existing conditions. And so because of this tension in my uh, political outview and methodology, I'm constantly dismissed and suppressed, and cast aside in my planning career.
Okay, so what do you do in your early career? I get it, you finished college and you're ready to make real change in the world, but a lot of your transition into the profession is going to be grunt work. This is a good time to learn how planning and power intersect while taking home a paycheck. The first thing you'll want to do is learn how to listen. Here's Tom.
I can suggest what I did at the start of my career as a planner, which was um, learn and listen first, but never let that be the solution, the resolution rather. So you learn and listen, but then engage with communities, engage with the politics. Planning is political. Too often We have this idea that, oh, politics is one thing, planning is another. No, they're, they're concurrent. They overlap. They run together. You can't deal with one without dealing with the other. The other thing I learned was in the Peace Corps and this was before I went to graduate school. I joined the Peace Corps 1964, is right at the very beginning. And in part, I did it so I didn't have to sign up to go to Vietnam because I was opposed to the war in Vietnam.
Mhm.
But I had never been outside the United States. I was a working class kid who, hadn't traveled very much, so it sounded interesting and romantic. We had a training course in community development, and the one thing I did learn from this group of crazy anthropologists, they weren't crazy. They were uh, radical anthropologists, was you have to learn how to listen. So when I had a planning job, and my first one out of graduate school was working for the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and working with communities and neighborhoods around the state to do planning. So um, I found it very enlightening to listen to communities, white communities, black communities, who universally said they've never been listened to. Their notion of relationship with the state was initially always antagonistic. Oh, you're from the state, you're coming, what do you want? Stay out, leave us alone. And that's typical in many communities and neighborhoods. Why? It's a lack of confidence that representatives of government entities are there to really listen and to learn and to engage with community. During the civil rights movement in the 70s, my consciousness was heightened by engagement in the protests, and was heightened by listening to Black revolutionaries who were fighting the federal government, the within the Community Action Program that was started by President Johnson, the Model Cities program. They were all targeting Black and brown neighborhoods, presumably to develop plans to improve the neighborhood. And once you sat down in one of those sessions, you understood immediately the deep lack of trust that people had for government. And people would teach me what I hadn't learned in school about the history and how deep that lack of trust was. It wasn't just the last generation, but it goes back many generations to slavery.
In your early career, you'll also want to develop your understanding of how history, socioeconomics, and politics interconnect with each other. Here's Sabrina.
It's important that we don't think in the abstract or disconnect what we're doing from our history, from race, class, gender, sexuality, environmental struggles. That one is inherent to urbanism, but also is inherent to the struggle to exist in the face of capitalist and neoliberal enclosure and the ongoing cultural genocide and genocide that we're seeing in the face of capitalist and fascist attacks. Like, it's important that we're seeing, if we're thinking of planning as political, that we're using the skills of planning and taking a long historical view, and kind of seeing history as a, a class race struggle, seeing it in the view of settler colonialism. And from that perspective, um, we can see that everything that we're doing in planning, whether it's tactical urbanism, housing, transit policy, community planning, it's all connected to the larger social, economic, and political historical context around us. And There's this quote that I really love. If we're not grounded in an understanding of class struggle, then all we're doing is just green urbanism while the system is working around us to build our early graves. So it's really important that we're aware of, have a deep understanding of history, but also political economy and its theory behind it.
So, if we take all these points of advice from Tom and Sabrina to listen and to contextualize, then an alternative approach to neoliberal communicative planning starts to materialize. We can call this transformative planning or community planning, very much an essential concept in the radical tradition. Tom explains.
Community planning is, uh, I can tell you what it's not. It's not just planning in communities. For me, it's planning fully engaged with communities and with communities that are struggling to survive. These are the communities that have been the victims of official planning and displacement, fighting displacement, gentrification, and, and typically communities of color, but also many immigrant communities that are, for the most part, fighting official planning that allies itself with real estate.
You may find community oriented courses in graduate school, but most of your course load will be concerned with high level technocratic policies. Planning school prepares planners to reach unbalanced compromises with communities who are in conflict with the development machine. Planning school seldom elevates the concept of community decision making. More often, academics and planners will cast community self interest as NIMBY, not in my backyard. In my first video about YIMBYs, I pulled from Robert Lake's 1993 article called Rethinking NIMBY, part of a 3-essay collection that defined the term YIMBY, yes in my backyard, as an anti-capitalist concept. Gone are the days. Before Sonia Barf co-opted the term YIMBY to mean let developers do whatever they want, originally it meant let's offer solutions that benefit communities. You should absolutely read this article, it's foundational, but here are Lake's thoughts on NIMBY and community planning. To castigate NIMBY as irrational is to avoid the exponentially more difficult task of resolving problems at their source. In colloquial terms, if we did the right thing the first time, we wouldn't need to try to fix things after the fact, at the expense of communities that we put in place before we recognized something was wrong. He continues, characterizing NIMBY as irrational while perhaps instrumental in the short run forecloses reasoned dialogue and thrusts the debate into a confrontational mode. For planners and analysts to perpetuate uncritically the conventional assumptions about NIMBY contributes to obfuscation, may undercut community empowerment, and exacerbates political conflict. As planners, we have to figure out exactly what a community opposes and why they oppose it. This can't be accomplished from a centralized approach. It requires that planners build trust within the communities they serve. A good planner should empower community members to engage in planning. A planner should help elevate community members to become champions for where they live. Tom explains.
Building trust is not a matter of just being nice and smiling and hanging out with people, but building trust is about listening. And not just listening, but processing what you hear and always asking yourself, well, how can this move things forward? Sometimes, or I should say often, it's by grabbing the ideas that fly by in our discussions in communities that have a rich potential. Not my ideas, ideas that come from the community. That's community planning. Yes, you have to build trust. And building trust is not by just going in and smiling and being nice. It also means engaging in conflicts too. In every community, there's a disruptor, or there's someone who uh, diverts the discussion and the process and moves it in a direction that's not going to be productive. But nobody wants to challenge him or her. But I'm not the solution. The solution has to come within. And some communities haven't developed that ability to have a discipline that's clear, that does not permit disruption in the interests of promoting the long-term process and the long-term goals. But again, you know, your professionals, your planners, are not going to resolve those issues. They have to be resolved from within. You can send signals that, listen, you're going to have to resolve this question because otherwise it's going to be a problem. But you can't resolve it as the outsider. This is a question of power. So one of the most beautiful things that I have experienced over the years is working with communities, and so many powerful people have come out and taken control of things in a way that has been productive. They know how to hear all voices without allowing for disruption. They know how to deal with the government representatives. There are tactics. They understand strategy and tactics. Not everybody's like this. Not every community has somebody like this. My experience, though, over the years has been almost invariably they are women and they're women of color, and they have not been adequately recognized as planners without a planning degree, without sometimes a college education, but able to develop visions of a better future and strategies in order to move in that direction.
Planners have a key role in shaping the future, but as I've underscored on this channel, the planner is limited in the types of changes they're able to make. And planners are rapidly becoming irrelevant. See, in a deregulated, market-dominated development system, planners most of the time are just writing down the goals of developers and investors. Planners are instrumental in moving public sector responsibilities and assets into private hands. Planning isn't about saying, this is the future we're going to have. Planning today is just a wish list and a hope that the private market will deliver. And to me, that's not planning at all. I do think that planning as a profession will become entirely irrelevant soon, maybe in our lifetimes, maybe in this decade. But if the profession, I don't know, grows a backbone and dares to say we deserve better, if we shift our focus away from increasing property values and returns on investment and instead focus on racial, social, and environmental justice, then professional planners will be crucial. Here's Sabrina's advice on how to conceptualize your position as a planner.
Come into this field ready to have that pedagogy of the oppressed orientation and be committed to that class, race, gender, sexuality, environmental struggle, and don't be aimless, be grounded and rooted in specifically historical materialism and scientific socialism, so that you have a sense of purpose in the work that you do. Neoliberalism must be rejected because it's neoliberal planning itself that, especially over the last 50 years, has led to the degradation of societal outcomes, and, which is important to planners. So that's why a new political philosophy for planning is needed, which would be historical materialism. And the reason for that is because it's really specifically scientifically grounded in an understanding of a long view of uh, history and the development of production and labor and how humans have developed over time. But also, just like some other advice, is unlearning and deprofessionalizing. For me, it's I wasn't rushing to aim for AICP and kind of being in those, networking in those spaces. Um, it was important for me to maintain being a community-based planner and working with grassroots groups and organizers, working with community boards to support anti-gentrification and anti-displacement efforts, and really getting that perspective and experience from community experts on the ground, I think is really is important, and not from the glass tower, Wall Street, which is typically the traditional experience, in government for planners. I also encourage planners to take, urban studies or urban geography, economic democracy, or labor courses at community college. If you're in New York at CUNY, they have a really good program. I also encourage planners to organize. Start your own organization, organize your neighbors. Um, we're in the face of an intense, fascist siege, increased evictions. Um, and so it's important that we're building community together, join a tenant union or start a radical planning collective, use your planning skills toward revolutionary organizing and political education.
A lot of this falls onto you as an individual. Most planning programs are not going to offer you a radical framework. You're going to have to devote a lot of time to educating and re educating yourself. A lot of this comes from listening to communities, as Tom has stressed, but you're also going to have to read a book, read an article, read a journal. Cultivating that thirst for knowledge is key, and I believe you can do it. Luckily, Sabrina has made it so easy to get started. They've created a website, which I've linked in the description. Here's their rundown on Plan for Liberation.
And then finally, uh, engage in engage in a practice of ongoing alternative education. I created a website, planforliberation.space, which is a digital library and resource guide meant for just like unlearning mainstream liberal settler colonial planning, and just specifically creating like a syllabus for history and theory, methods and other strategies rooted specifically in historical materialist and a communist pedagogy of the oppressed, because that didn't exist for me, and so it was really important that um, I had that access. And so it's important to read texts, articles, watch documentaries in the Black radical tradition and communist tradition, Kwame Ture, Frantz Fanon, W.E.B. Du Bois. Um, these folks offer decolonial planning history and theory, methods and strategies that we don't get to typically read in planning schools, and they're not often considered urbanist or urban geography.
Finally, I'd like to leave you with another resource from Tom. Tom is a founder and an editor of Progressive City. Progressive City is a fantastic resource for transformative planning, theory, and action geared towards professionals. Here's Tom for more details.
Progressive City is a national, international group of planners, activists who are engaged in environmental justice and planning issues in the broadest sense. There's Progressive City has a website and a blog, and it was preceded by two other organizations, Planners for Equal Opportunity, which was born in the civil rights movement in the US in the 1970s, and it was succeeded by Planners Network, which was truly a network of academics, professionals, and activists who wanted alternatives to the official doctrines in the planning profession. And over the years, Planners Network developed a magazine, which I co-edited, and then Progressive City, which is the website, which I also participate in. We've held many conferences, usually every year or every 2 years, which were consciously engaging local activists, local and national activists. We did have one international conference in Mexico, with the idea of solidifying this commitment to communities and real struggles, bigger struggles, and not just physical planning, not just planning in the most narrow sense, but planning for environmental justice, planning against disaster capitalism. These are all themes that you would find in our conferences that were very dynamic. Every conference we organized was done with local activists, not just academics. Academics, students, and local activists were a central part of the planning and development of those conferences. So Planners Network, the Progressive Planning magazine, which ran for, I think, 16 years, stopped printing when print publications were succeeded by online publications, and that's where Progressive City takes over. And the whole idea is to open up planning to diversity, to diversity of viewpoints, and to open up planning to progressive global action. The activists that wind up engaging with our organization then are one step away from the communities we want to engage with and deal with and listen to.
I've also added links to Progressive City and the Planners Network in the description. Check them out along with Plan for Liberation. I hope, despite copious real talk, that this was helpful. I don't think the planning profession can be saved, but I do think we can create something new together. It takes a lot of personal discipline to unlearn, but I do know it's possible. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video if it spoke to you. Be sure to check out my video on planning theory and stick around for more in that series. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.